Alright guys, it's finally here. This is going to be my top 10 games from 2020. Now this list will be a little bit different than most people's lists because my conditions are that I have to beat the game. And I only actually beat 10 games that were released this year. You guys know I play a lot of retro games and probably a lot more retro and backlog games than anything else. So games like Ghost of Tsushima, Doom Eternal, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 Remake. These are all games I spent some time with and obviously would beat out some games on the list. As you'll see, there's some games that are not very good on this list, but I think it'll be pretty interesting. There'll be some games that you probably wouldn't expect. But that being said, these are also just from genres and series that I prefer or my preference. So it should make this an interesting list nonetheless, but enjoy. We will start at number 10 with G.I. Joe Operation Blackout on the PS4. This was a game that got announced mid-year and then released in October. I picked it up, played through it, and actually earned a platinum trophy for it. There was a lot of fan service with this game, and I did find some enjoyment with the iconic characters and the cel-shaded art design that they went with for the comic book style storytelling. However, the gameplay leaves more to be desired. The game has a Fortnite look to it, but it doesn't control anywhere near as good. Shooting can be difficult with loose controls and the annoying reload mechanic that they factored in. The missions are all too similar when you run through the stage to an objective and then try to hold your position as oncoming enemies charge you. This is really rinse and repeat, and the AI of the general enemies and boss fights is some of the worst you'll ever see. They also reuse the stages as you run through it once as the Joes and then once again as the Cobras. So all in all, it's not a very good game, unless you are a G.I. Joe fan. And if you are, then you might find some enjoyment here, or you just might be irritated by the lack of quality. Moving on to number 9, I have Battletoads 2020 on the Xbox One. Now I was definitely intrigued when this got teased at what I believe was E3 2018. I'm a longtime fan of the beat-em-up genre, however the Battletoads games were never my favorite. So when this new entry dropped and was free on the Xbox Game Pass, I went ahead and checked it out. Now while many people took issue with the character design for the Toads, I personally did not have an issue here. Being a Battletoads game, you get a mixed mash of beat-em-up style stages as well as platforming, racing, and minigames. To be honest, I found the least amount of enjoyment with the beat-em-up style stages. I thought that the Toads controlled just fine, but I felt that the stages were way too long. The enemy design, while creative, were not very fun to beat on, and most of them were like sponges and took way too many hits to kill. I just always couldn't wait for these stages to be over so that I could move on to the platforming stage, racing stage, or minigames. The best part by far of the game was the cutscenes. The humor reminded me of a 90s style Saturday morning cartoon. The voice acting was great, and it left me wanting the spin-off cartoon of the Battletoads. I do feel that there is some fun to be had here despite the game's flaws, and at only a 3 to 5 hour investment, it's short enough to not wear out its welcome. Now on to Star Wars Squadrons on the PS4 at number 8. This was another game that got surprise announced mid-year and then released in October. I immediately jumped into the campaign and played through it, as this really left me with mixed feelings. The gameplay itself was really good. It is more of a simulation style flying as opposed to the more arcade style flying in, let's say, Star Wars Battlefront 2. You have more control of your starship and will have to balance your power between your weapons and shields, and then even decide if you want to focus your power to front shields or back shields. This is good or bad depending on your preference. If you just want to fly around and shoot things, then you probably won't get a ton of enjoyment here. This is for players who want to feel more like they are actually in an X-Wing or TIE fighter, and have more control of their situation. The campaign is around 5 to 6 hours long, and you will play missions from both sides of the battle, and also be forced to use an assortment of different class ships. The missions were alright, but nothing special. However, I had a problem with the presentation. I really did not care for the style or storytelling where you are in a hangar and then you have the option to walk around and talk to different pilots. This was very lame, and the fact that it was optional meant that it really added nothing to the overall game itself. Just a big letdown, as I would have preferred proper cutscenes instead, but I'm sure that factored into it not being a full price title at only $40 on launch day. The campaign is more of a long tutorial that prepares you for the multiplayer. And the multiplayer is a lot of fun while being pretty challenging. There is a dogfight mode where you will be placed in a squadron and simply have an aerial team deathmatch style of gameplay that can be very intense. Then, there is Fleet Battles, which I found to be my favorite. In this mode, it's a multi-stage objective-based game where you take turns going on the offensive or defensive until you've worked your way towards the enemy destroyer class ship. You can also play this mode against user or AI enemies. Star Wars Squadrons is also fully VR compatible, and I recently got a VR headset, and this game mode is out of control. I unfortunately can only play 1 or 2 matches until I get nauseous, but I applaud them for making this happen, as it's an entirely new experience. Moving on to number 7 on the list, we have Raji, an ancient epic on the Nintendo Switch. This was shadow dropped during the Nintendo Indie World event in August of 2020. The game was developed by Notting Head Games, which is an Indian-based team, and this is their first ever game released. I picked it up that day and did a full review of it. Raji, an ancient epic is an action-adventure game that focuses on platforming and combat. You play as the main protagonist, Raji, on the adventure to save your brother Kulu, who was kidnapped by demons. Your adventure takes you through ancient India and has a camera that is fixed yet dynamic, as it will rotate around, showing you the absolutely gorgeous world you are traveling through. The voice acting and the visuals are spectacular for an indie game, and the love put into it is evident. The platforming at times can be tricky with the fixed camera, but it's simply something that you can adjust to. As you progress through the game, you will acquire different weapons which keep the combat fresh and interesting. My lone complaint with this game when reviewing it was the price. The game is only 5 to 6 hours long and is a $24.99 price tag digitally. I think the value here is closer to the $15 range. It's a digitally only title for now and can be found on the Nintendo eShop and PlayStation Store, so try to catch it on a sale. Next up at number 6 is The Pathless on the PlayStation 5. This was actually the first game that I completed on the PS5. However, it is also available on the PS4 as well. The Pathless is yet another indie action adventure style game. This one was developed by Giant Squid, the same people that made Abzu, and published by Annapurna Interactive. In the game, you play as the hunter who is an archer with an eagle companion. Your goal is to lift the curse that was placed by the God Slayer on this mythical island. There are only 4 main locations of the island that you visit, but a 5th if you count the intro. In each location, you are to return light to the 3 obelisks. You'll need to do this by gathering light stones and bringing them to the 3 obelisks. So you traverse through the island looking for these 3 light stones. You traverse by shooting arrows at talisman that fill your sprint meter, allowing you to run faster and jump higher. Your eagle will also help you to jump higher and glide through the island. There is no map, so you need to use your spirit vision to help you locate the light stones. And once you reach them, there is some sort of puzzle required to obtain said light stone. After returning light to all 3 obelisks, you will fight a cursed spirit. In doing so, you remove the curse from each spirit. This game and island is absolutely gorgeous. Traversing through the island is fun and enjoyable. The puzzles are a nice little challenge, but nothing you should struggle with. I really enjoyed my experience with The Pathless. My lone complaint, again, would be the price point for the game's length. I bought the game physically on the PS5 for $50, and it took me about 5 to 6 hours for my first playthrough. So if you can get the game for a sale, or maybe after a couple years, then it should be something you should give a try. Moving up in the top 5, I have Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 2. So the original Bloodstained Curse of the Moon was a retro-style tie-in to Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. It was developed and published by NT Creates, who does fantastic work, by the way, for exceeding the Kickstarter goal of Ritual of the Night. Some people actually preferred Curse of the Moon over Ritual of the Night. I did love the game, but I wouldn't go that far. Anyway, since the first one was so well received, they decided to make a sequel. And man, this is a fantastic game. The game resembles that of NES Castlevania games. I, however, think it plays better and is actually more enjoyable. You once again take control of Zenjutsu, and as you travel through each stage, you will add new members to your team. There is Dominique, who was a large part of Ritual of the Night, and she has some fantastic magical powers along with the ability to heal. Then there is Robert, who is a marksman. He has a low health gauge, but is very useful as he can be used as a sniper and has various other helpful attacks. And finally, Hachi, who appears similar to a fox but controls a mech that just obliterates things. You can also use Hachi's magic to go invincible, which is very helpful in your quest. Playing through the game, you can seamlessly switch between characters and will need to. Each stage has branching paths, and certain paths can only be accessed by particular characters. The cast of characters is, I believe, better than the first game, and if you like the characters from the first game, then you'll get to use those as well. There are multiple chapters, 4 or 5, I believe, and each chapter you will approach with a different assortment of characters. This will lead to utilizing different paths and managing stages with new characters and sometimes without previous characters. I really did enjoy the game. However, midway through the 4th chapter, I got sidetracked and a little uninterested in revisiting the same stages again. I think in trying to extend the game, it wore out its welcome in my opinion. Regardless, you can stop after any chapter you want, and the time I did spend with it was pure retro style gold. Boy oh boy. Alright, at number 4 we have the controversial The Last of Us Part 2. So I never played the original Last of Us on the PS3, but the gameplay for Part 2 looks so good that I went ahead and played the remastered version of the original on the PS4 about a month before its release. I was blown away by the story, and while the game was far from perfect, it still had me pumped to play the sequel. I will start first with the gameplay, and while it's similar in many ways to the original game, and I know a lot of people were very critically saying that the game really brought nothing new to the table. This is correct for the most part, but at the same time, they may have perfected it. The gunplay is damn good. The melee attacks are vicious as hell. The enemy AI is probably the best that I've ever seen in a game. And I mean, if you can think of better enemy AI in the game, then please let me know, because I can't think of one. The graphics, visuals, sound effects, voice acting are all top of its class. They did a wonderful job with the world. However, you don't get the variety as you did in the original. You spend too much time in Seattle, Washington, and while they did a wonderful job creating it, it gets old after a while. So if we were to leave it here, then this would be the number 1 on my list. However, this is where we get to the spoiler talk. And so if you don't want to hear it, then you can click down to chapter or to number 3 in the chapter selection down below. So obviously they killed off Joel about 2 to 3 hours in. And this sucks for many reasons. Mostly being that Joel is most people's favorite character. Ellie has her moments, but can be a bratty little bitch most of the time. So the way they did Joel was dirty. But this leads to a damn good revenge story. And I mean, hey, I like a good revenge story as much as the next guy. And you set off with your girlfriend Dina, and as a companion character, she is fine, I guess. However, they feel the need to push this love story between Ellie and Dina. Then they throw in Dina getting pregnant with Jesse's baby, and it's just a bit much. Ellie turns into a psychopath, and her story ends about halfway through the game. Then you play the second half as Abby, who's the girl that killed Joel. And this is a bit unsettling at first until you realize that Abby is actually a much more likable character. That and she actually is extremely fun to control. The game should have ended when Abby's story collides with Ellie's, but it didn't, and the 3rd chapter totally kills the game for me. In the end, they killed off Joel, turned Ellie into a horrible person, and although the game has many high points and I do like Abby, I can't rank the game any higher based off of principle. Alright, the top 3 starts off with Neo 2 on the PS4. And I only ever got about 10 hours into the original Neo. Enough to know that I liked it, but also enough to know that it was hard as balls and a pretty long game. However, I had just beaten Sekiro at the end of 2019 and had this great idea where I wanted to compare Sekiro, Neo 2, and Ghost of Tsushima. Well, I got 2/3 of the way there, and I finally beat Neo 2, but it took me over 100 hours. And this is the main reason that you won't find Ghost of Tsushima or Doom Eternal on this list. I spent so much time with Neo 2 that I ran out of time. So Neo 2 is a PS4 exclusive that was developed by Team Ninja. It is both a prequel and sequel to the original Neo. The story is very Japanese inspired and has a timeline that spans several hundred years. It is hard for me to really explain what is going on, so I won't try. Neo 2 is different from the original in that you can create your own character, which I preferred. I just feel like this personalized the game a lot more for me. So I didn't focus on the story because this game is all about the combat, and the combat is absolutely amazing. The game graphically has its moments, however it's not the spectacle like Ghost of Tsushima is. It's obviously that they favored performance over graphics, as when in combat your character is fast, fluid, precise, with absolutely zero slowdown or lag. This makes you feel like a true samurai, and while the game is very punishing, and I do mean punishing, once you clear a particular mission or boss, you'll get a great sense of satisfaction. The game also gives you a crap load of options as far as how you want to play the game. You can go with a heavier build that will slow your character down but gives you better defense, or you can go with that lightweight option where your armor isn't as strong, but you are much more agile and swift. The same goes with weaponry. There's a wide variety of weapons you can fight with: a katana, dual swords, longsword, axe, scythe, and then ranged weapons like a musket or a bow and arrow. It can be a bit overwhelming at times, and can work against the game. You'll spend so much time picking up weapons and armor, then selling them and switching between them that it can either keep the game fresh or wear you out. There are around 20 main missions with an additional 50 plus side missions. You'll fight both human enemies as well as yokai, and that enemy variety is very well done. There are a total of 60 plus boss fights. You'll face off against many bosses several times, and half of these are optional. Some are more challenging than others, and the difficulty bar is pretty high on some and not so bad on some other ones. Finally, Neo 2 also mixes in collectibles, which you guys know I'm a sucker for. The game is extremely deep, and I don't have the time to get into all of its elements and upgrade systems. So if you're up for a challenge, then it's definitely a game you will get your money's worth out of. Alright, at number 2 I have Darksiders Genesis on the PS4. I know the PC release came out in late 2019, but the console release was early 2020. Well, at least that's the physical version was. Regardless, I'm a huge fan of the Darksiders series. I was a bit skeptical when I saw this game getting announced. All the other Darksiders games followed a third-person action RPG format, while this appeared to be a top-down isometrical view, hack-and-slash, twin-stick shooter game, and on top of that, it was not full-price title at $40 on launch day. Well, let's just say that I was pleasantly surprised with this entry, to say the least. So this game is actually a prequel to the original Darksiders game, and you'll play the entire game with the tandem of War and Strife, together going on several missions. You'll be able to switch seamlessly between the two as they each have their own benefits, as Strife is obviously your range specialist and War is your melee specialist. Switching between the two also benefits you when your health gets low. As your character is idle, his health will regenerate. The format also leads to more dialogue, as the two will banter back and forth, sometimes just for comic relief. However, their dialogue also contributes to the overall story, as they not only discuss your current mission, but they also discuss prior events that help to contribute to the lore of the Darksiders universe. While the perspective has changed from third person to isometrical, the format of the game is still pretty similar, as you'll gather souls and collectibles throughout the stages, which can then be returned to Vulgrim, as well as newly introduced Dis, who is another demon merchant. Here you can upgrade or purchase new items or abilities for your character. There is also an arena mode where you can take on hordes of enemies, which allows you to collect more souls and additional items. Samael is back and plays an integral part in the story, and his contributions I found very enjoyable. The game is truly a blast to play, and if you were detoured because of the change in perspective, then give it a try and see what you think. Probably the only thing I wish they would have included is more cutscenes. Aside from the opening cutscene, there really aren't any. The story is mostly told with still photos. The voice acting is really good, as I believe most of the characters are performed by their original actors. But I'm pretty sure the lack of high quality cutscenes was a result of a low budget, which is why the game was not full priced. Nevertheless, it's a great entry in the series and definitely worth playing. Alright, now to my number one game that I beat, which was released in 2020. I have Streets of Rage 4 on the PlayStation 4. And being that Streets of Rage 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, this long-awaited addition to the series had big shoes to fill. So much so that I tried really hard to keep my expectations in check. I just really thought I was going to be let down by Streets of Rage 4, and then wished the game would have just never came out and they would have left the series alone. Well, let's just say that this game blew me away. We will start with the graphical design of the characters, enemies, and stages. The unique art style that they went with here is simply a work of art. Axel's rugged, older look. Blaze has finally been brought to justice so you can appreciate all those curves, and Adam looks like a straight boss. The stage design is absolutely gorgeous, with lively backgrounds and interesting elements to manage. And the music, which to most fans is the most important part of the game, is done extremely well here. It took me a while of playing through the stages, but I have to say that the soundtrack here absolutely made me a fan, and I love it. And if you don't like it, well, they can switch to the retro soundtrack. On top of all this, they integrated in a combo system, which helps you rack up high scores to achieve higher rank on each stage. I found this very addicting, and didn't stop until I achieved a platinum trophy on the game. From beginning to end, Streets of Rage 4 delivers for me on all aspects. The replayability is extremely high, and it hasn't stood the test of time like the original, so I can't say that it's the best game in the series. However, it completely blew me away, and there's no weakness in the game that I can think of. This is why I simply couldn't place any other game above it on this list. Well, I hope you found this video entertaining, and I'll see you in the next one.